Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we know we may have more audience members joining us as they leave their previous meetings and join ours. But we're really excited for this talk today. My name, for anyone who's not familiar, my name is Rebecca Ganan, and I am the acting co-lead of the McMaster Collaborative for Health and Aging, together with Dr. Maureen Marco-Reed. We're really pleased to be able to host these collaborative conversations. Before we get into to our conversation today and introducing our speakers, I just want to start by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the lands on which we are privileged to live, work, and play. And to say that is really to acknowledge the debt to those who were here before us, and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship that Indigenous peoples have to this land, and also to peaceably share and care for the resources. We want to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation, and also in a way that honors that dish with one spoon wampum agreement. That wampum uses the symbolism of a dish to represent the territory, and one spoon to represent that people are to share the resources of the land and only take what they need. So I'm just going to also, today we're having this wonderful collaborative conversation that is about living well with dementia and learning from Anthea and Helen about examples of working in partnership with people living with dementia, such an important timely topic. And so we're really happy to have their collective expertise. I'm just going to ask Allison if we can go to the next slide. We just have a few housekeeping reminders for everyone before we get started. You will have seen or heard that this session will be recorded. So just remember to please mute yourself when you're not speaking so we can avoid any kind of background noise. We are going to today, there will be an opportunity for questions towards the end. You can feel free to chat, use the chat function during the talk, and we will come back to your questions towards the end, but we really want to hear from Anthea and Helen and learn from their insights, and then we'll have a Q&A towards that end. The other alternative is to hold your questions yourself, and then during that Q&A time at the end, you can raise your hand and we'd be happy to have your questions at that point in time. We also have live transcription that's been enabled, and I need to do a little bit of promotion of our social media handle. So if you haven't already found out, the Collaborative for Health and Aging is now active on Twitter. So you can certainly follow us and continue the conversations using the hashtag collaborative conversations. And we will have an opportunity afterwards. So this main session will be an hour. For those of you who wish, we do invite you to join for a sort of less formal debrief and reaction conversation from 1 to 1:30. You're all welcome to do that and take part in that, just to continue those conversations and keep them moving along. And this is in particular maybe of interest to our patient and caregiver and citizen partners, as well as our trainees who want to share their thoughts and reflections on the discussion. We also always look for opportunities for feedback. So we will have we've tried to keep it short, evaluation. Because we are just launching these collaborative conversations, we sure would appreciate your feedback and your ideas about about topics or about ways to meaningfully engage you in the collaborative. So stay tuned for that brief survey afterwards, and please do complete it. Because this is the first series, we're really hoping in particular to hear from you to help us to formulate our plan for those conversations that follow. So I just want to, if anyone's less familiar with the work of the collaborative, I know some of you were actively involved in our recent event. I just want to let everyone know the McMaster Collaborative for Health and Aging is a coalition of researchers, trainees, older adults, and caregivers working together with this shared goal around improving the health and well-being of aging Canadians and thinking about advancing patient-oriented research on aging. And we do that in a variety of ways, and thinking about providing resources, tools, sharing collective expertise, consultation, and support, all in ways that build patient-oriented research capacity in Ontario and beyond. So we just really also want to acknowledge the support from our funders through the Ontario Spore Support Unit and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research through the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research and funding through the province of Ontario. And so before we introduce our speakers for today, I also want to highlight for you when our next collaborative conversation will be. And the idea behind these collaborative conversations is a little bit about what's not in the paper. So all of us have read papers thinking about engagement or thinking about ways to meaningfully involve members of the public as meaningful partners in research teams to think about throughout the research cycle. But sometimes we're left wondering, well, we just want more detail. We want to really get into the how, the why, what was challenging, how did you overcome it, those kinds of things. And so we want these to be a conversation space for us to exchange that kind of tacit knowledge. Our next collaborative conversation is coming up on June 28th, and you'll see that that topic is Nothing for Us Without Us, Reflections on the Engagement of People with Lived and Living Experience in the Engage with Harm Reduction Study. And we have our Manager of Strategic Initiatives, Dr. Sue Chen Corazoni, who is, and some of her research partners from some of her work that she did before she joined us, who will be sharing their insights together. So looking forward to that, and save the date. We also have the next collaborative conversation that'll be in September as well. So stay tuned for more information. More details will be coming. So last, I'd like to thank our presenters. And I am going to just, I'm going to tell you, if you haven't looked at their bios yet, I'm just so thrilled to have the two of them coming to present. So we have Dr. Anthea Innes, who is a professor. She's recently joined us in the Department of Health and Aging and Society at McMaster University, and holds the Gilbrea Chair in Aging and Mental Health, and is just coming into as well the directorship of the Gilbrea Center. So we're really pleased to have Dr. Anthea Innes joining us, and I'm going to describe her in just a minute, but also Dr. Helen Rochford-Brennan, who is a partner, who is the Global Dementia Ambassador, Vice Chair of the Irish Dementia Working Group, and a valuable partner to Dr. Innes. So Dr. Innes moved to Canada in January 2022 to take up a post as the Professor of Health, Aging and Society and the Gilbrea Chair at McMaster University. She's from Scotland and is a social scientist who has specialized in the area of dementia for the last 25 years. She's conducted research in 3 regions of the UK, Scotland, England, and Northern Ireland, in Europe as part of EU-funded studies, as well as focused studies in Ireland and Malta, as well as in Canada. At the core of her work is to engage those with lived experiences impacted by dementia, namely those diagnosed with the condition, their family carers, and professional care supporters. She's been an advocate for community engagement, inclusion, and involvement of people with dementia for the last decade, and enjoys working in partnership with people living with dementia and their networks. And she's also written a book that you can find from the bio and access, and that book shares examples of what works in practice for those living with dementia to different audiences. So you might want to check out that book. And now Dr. Helen Rochford-Brennan is a global dementia ambassador. She was diagnosed with dementia in 2012, is a former chair and current vice chair of the Irish Dementia Working Group. She is currently a member and was formerly chairperson of the European Working Group of People with Dementia and its nominee to the Board of Alzheimer Europe. So these are we're just so privileged to have you here today. Helen sits on the monitoring committee of Ireland's first national dementia strategy and a panel member of multiple advisory groups in Ireland and Europe. Through her time with these organizations, she's campaigned to raise awareness of dementia through a rights-based approach, including through the media, speaking at international conferences, engaging with pharmaceutical companies, scientists, clinicians, educators, students, through participation in various research projects, including those focusing on developing evidence-based diagnosis, palliative care, rural isolation, and more recently, lived during the COVID lockdown. Helen strongly believes in the primacy of patient and public involvement. She's contributed to several books and documentaries about dementia. Helen has received several awards for her advocacy work, including an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the National University of Ireland, Galway, for her work on the rights of people with dementia. We have some excellent expertise that we are thrilled to share with you today. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our presenters. Thank you for agreeing to join us today, and I can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you very much for asking us to do this, Rebecca. And I was struck there when you were talking about your next seminar, that there's an expression in the dementia field, nothing about us without us. So it's a very similar phrase. So when we first started talking about this, it seemed really natural to have one of my collaborators in the dementia field present. And I'm really glad that Helen has managed to find the time to do this at the end of her day because of the time difference. So this is now the end of her working day. So thank you for joining us, Helen. The idea that how we're going to do this presentation, I've got a few slides that I'm going to briefly go through, and then we're going to do a bit of a fireside chat style conversation. Helen and I have prepared for this and came up with some questions that she will then respond to, and we'll just have a bit of a discussion about some key points in relation to partnership working. But just to get started, I'm going to share my screen, and I've just got a few slides just as an initial overview. Can you now see my screen?
You can, yes.
You can, good. I'm just checking before I move forward. So, and I think you can now see the wrong display setting. So there we go.
It's just loading and then there we are, perfect, thank you.
Okay, so there's different variations and levels of user-led partnerships. So in the UK and in Europe, there's something called patient-public involvement, which is often quite tokenistic in the sense that maybe one or two people living with dementia are involved in certain ways. Those could be on advisory groups. We also have quite a lot of user forums now, examples of user forums. We have examples of people living with dementia working as co-researchers, co-producing outputs and co-presenting. This is an example of that today. But what really makes a user-led partnership, and this really is one that's driven by people living with dementia and care partners. And I think as academics and researchers, I think we can learn so much from inspirational people like Helen, but also how do we involve more and more people living with dementia who are maybe harder to reach because they might not have the public speaking and articulation abilities of people like Helen, who's been one of it kind of forefront internationally, actually, not just in Ireland and Europe. So how do we do that? How do we actually move towards a model where we have more and more people living with dementia and their care partners informing the research that we do? So it's driven by people living with dementia rather than academics thinking, oh, well, we'll do a project on this or a project on that, and then just checking in with a person with dementia or two to see if it's a good idea. How do we actually move from that to actually making sure the research we do is grounded in the real world concerns of people living with dementia in ways that will help improve their lives? So I think there's a lot of learning processes to be had, and I think we need to have different people in the mix. And people living with dementia have got to be strongly in that, along with researchers and various other stakeholder groups. And we need to kind of explore other participation models and other partnerships in practice to achieve real world benefits. And what can we learn from other models that already exist? There's different models across the world now that we know work, and we don't need to be reinventing the wheel with this. And I think the key thing that I've learned is that doing this kind of work does involve time and it involves relationship building. But we know that it's possible to do this, and we know that we can do this really successfully, but we need to learn from what's already happened. These are just some examples of Helen and I working together over the years. This was the third Irish Remote and Rural Dementia Conference back in May 2018, and the weather then was absolutely glorious, Helen, not the rainy day that you're telling me that you have today. And Helen also visited Scotland last year once the lockdown allowed travel, and she did herself in Carmel, who is another advocate person. She doesn't have dementia, her mother had dementia, and she supports Helen when Helen travels. They did a bit of a tour of Scotland last year as a holiday when lockdown was finally meant that travel was possible. So Helen and I have kept it. I'd class Helen as a friend. She's an inspirational colleague, but she's also a lot of fun to be around and a really good friend. And she also visited Salford, where I worked previously, and she met with our panel of people living with dementia and their care partners. That's Helen and Carmel both there, sharing ideas. And our panel of people living with dementia and care partners were really inspired by Helen and Carmel's knowledge and expertise. And we're now going to move to kind of this fireside there's a dog. It's Helen's dog. We're going to move to this fireside chat conversation where we're going to talk particularly about Helen's experiences here in different areas about research, how Helen has written and disseminated her experiences, how she's been involved in funding decisions and policy influencing. So I'm going to take the slides off because we thought that this would be distracting. So and I think, yes, I can see that Alison has set this as a kind of spotlight. So if you can imagine, we're just having a conversation facing each other rather than over a Zoom call, and hopefully this format will work. So Helen, I've not even given you a chance to speak there, have I? I've just went straight into it there. But now there's going to be plenty of time for you to speak. So can I just start with the first question that we were thinking that we wanted to talk about, which was the different types of involvement you've had in research projects. Can you tell us about those and what's maybe worked well and what's enabled you to participate as fully as possible in those projects?
I suppose the first thing I would like to say is thanks very much, everybody, for inviting me today. And thanks, Anthea, for this nice fireside chat. I can assure you, if you are in Ireland, the fire is down because it's very cold. Involving people with dementia in research, as you talked about, for us is about public involvement. And that's really, really important to us because for many years, there was a great word called tokenistic when it came to research. So everything was done, and then we were asked for a last-minute view when the research projects were already done and dusted practically. So it's empowering, and it gives us confidence to be involved in research. It also gives us a sense of purpose, and most of all, our voices are heard. We make that contribution. We're part of the conversation. And nobody should be left behind. No voice of a person with dementia should be left behind. We should be part of that conversation and set the scene as to what is required.
And I completely agree with you on that, Helen. So can you give us an example of a research project where you have helped set the scene?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, we want to get involved in planning. And if you plan a project, a research project really well, when I say plan, we need to be at the table at the time that you're thinking about the project. Not because there's a big reason for that. Because many times people like myself travel long distances to participate in a research project. And we realize that the researchers have never thought for one moment that they may have to take into consideration travel and accommodation for us. So what we do today is we say, when you're setting your project up, and this is where I've been involved in planning, my planning is you must include a cost in your budget that you are going to look for this research funding. You must include money that will cover accommodation and incidentals for people. Also, we have full frank discussions with our researchers. You know, there are things that researchers may never think about, in particular when you're in Europe, Anthea. As you know, we travel from place to place. So I need things like support, like having Carmel to support me to get to my destination. I also need there's simple things, but things that people never think about when they're doing research, that I like to sit at the front of the plane. So because people like myself get anxiety attacks, I also like to stay in a room close to a lift that goes straight to reception so I don't get lost. And for me, a full understanding of my contribution and the time allotted to me, that is taken into consideration. And I have been involved in some recent projects, and this has worked really, really well. And I also ask to leave a few extra minutes for somebody with dementia when they're giving a presentation, because we look at words and we lose words. We cannot get that word. So somebody says, researcher says, okay, I want you to work with me and I'm going to give you 10 minutes to give your presentation. I say to them, no, don't give me 10 minutes. Don't ever allot 10 minutes for somebody, because we see words and cannot get that word. So you need to always bear in mind that those couple of extra minutes, give us, a great sense of being able to achieve what we want to achieve.
Yeah. And I guess the preparation is key, because even for today, we talked about how best to facilitate your involvement and to make sure that you had a chance to prepare. And so that's what we've tried to do. So some of it's quite common sense, do you think, Helen? And often it's overlooked in terms of people forget the common sense for some of these things.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's common sense, but I also think it's about awareness. And to be honest, many times the onus is on ourselves, Anthea, that we explain what we want and not to be afraid to ask. And what has happened in the past, because our voices were never at the table, is that now with the awareness that we're creating, we are asking to be considered what our needs are. And they're very simple. You know, we are the same people as I always say, I'm the same person the day after I was diagnosed as the day I was diagnosed. So there's not a lot that I ask for, except that it's important that we're safeguarded, that our journeys are made simple, and we can give 100% then when we finally get to that table of discussion.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to ask you about the different ways that you have talked and disseminated about your experiences, whether that's in writing. For example, you wrote that lovely chapter for our Remote and Rural book about your experiences of living in rural Ireland, which was one of the most positively reviewed chapters in that book in terms of sharing your experiences of what it was like to live as a person, as a woman with dementia in rural Ireland. And also, you've spoken so many places, but could you tell us more about how you found your experience of sharing your experiences?
Yeah, well, first of all, can I say that advocacy is not easy, and it certainly is not for everyone. We certainly see the death and destruction that advocacy along the way of our advocacy journey. It is rewarding to have our voices heard. When I was diagnosed over 10 years ago, here in Ireland, nobody was talking about it. Our voices weren't heard, but we were very lucky that we looked to Scotland for leadership, because then people with dementia were speaking out, which gave Ireland the opportunity to change. I've engaged with all types of groups, from pharma to scientists to academics to researchers, because my voice matters. And I want to make sure that not just my voice, but that the language that all of these people and all of these groups, that they understand language matters to me as well. I have the experiential knowledge of living with Alzheimer's disease. Look, in general, it's very receptive. However, I always find that speaking to an audience that they do not want to ask the question of me afterwards. So if there's a panel discussion, the person with Alzheimer's or the person with dementia, whatever type, is not always asked a question. So we wonder about that, or it's maybe not put in the chat directly to the person that has the illness or has the experience and knowledge. And I continue to contribute to books and journals and the media, of course, because it gives me hope, Anthea. And hope is all I have, as you are all well aware. There is no cure for my illness of Alzheimer's. In fact, there's no 100% diagnosis. I'm still listening after 10 years to biomarkers and tangles and all the rest, and we haven't got any closer. And I thought surely when we moved very quickly to find some solutions for COVID, that maybe there was an opportunity there to see that something was going to happen for my illness, and it hasn't. So my passion is about human rights and the rights of people with dementia. That diagnosis is correct and that disclosure is done in the appropriate place, that we have a good post-diagnostic support, like a pathway of care, but a pathway of care with hope. Anthea, it's easy to write and speak about these things because I've done them so many times, but it empowers me to do it. And I hope that I empower others by doing it, and that I inspire people with dementia across the world to not be afraid to speak, not to be afraid to engage, and not to be afraid to say what they really want to say. Sometimes people are afraid of because of the stigma related to the illness. Yeah. You know, it's very much referred to as a mental illness. And when I talk about language, I will talk about demented. You know, we're all demented. Well, you know, we're not. We're not demented. We have a memory impairment, and so working, contributing and working on books, and the more awareness we can create, the more awareness that I can create myself is always breaking down that stigma.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do. And I actually, many times you may have heard me say, I do not believe I am stigmatized where I live, but I truly believe that my illness of Alzheimer's is totally misunderstood. And I would love the world to move away from the word stigma. But because I think if we start talking about being misunderstood, because we are misunderstood, because people cannot think we can contribute to books, or so many times it's been said to me, how did you do that? Well, I do it because I do brain exercises every day. I do it because I really want to change how the world looks at dementia.
Yeah,
I hope that answers your question.
It does. And it also, there's just a few points I want to pick up on. The word demented is really a horrible word, because if you go to the Latin derivative, it means without mind, and nobody is without mind. So I agree with you. That's just, it's not a positive phrase to be used at all when it comes to living with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, but equally have been labeled with having a disease. Some people like to know that it's a disease, and other people don't like to be labeled as having a disease either. So it's, the language issue is an important one, and you've done a lot to raise awareness of some of those terms when you've spoken publicly. And I've certainly seen you in action and inspiring other people living with dementia to think, yes, I can talk out too, and I can contribute to these discussions. So even when you came to Salford and met with our panel, who were they called themselves agitators for change. They were already wanting to make a difference, but they were certainly inspired by the breadth of places that you had visited and the breadth of people that you'd spoken to about living with dementia. So you're right. I think not everyone can do that, but you're certainly an inspirational role model for many people living with dementia. I'm going to change focus a little bit now, if you don't mind, and move on to another question. I think the first time I actually met you properly was when we both served on a funding panel, a European funding panel, where decisions were being made about funding dementia research awards. And you have served on various panels before. I think you'd only done one or two before that one, but you've done many since. I know that you've done a lot of these since. And I just wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about what funding panels could do to help you participate more fully in making the decisions about research that will be funded, because it's relatively rare that people living with dementia are actually on the table around when the funding decisions are made. They're often sent a summary of the project to comment on, but in terms of actually being around the table making the decisions, that's been a rarer occurrence in my experience when I've sat on these funding panels. So, and I was very impressed by how you challenged various misconceptions on that very first funding panel that we both sat on. Very gently pointing out when some of the things that researchers might have thought were important, that you were able to say, well, actually, that's not the key issue here. So yeah, I just wanted to bring attention to the fact that you've served on these panels, and yeah, what's helped you and what could help you more or help other people with dementia serve on these kind of panels.
Well, the first thing is, as you mentioned in the beginning yourself, is nothing about us without us. So if researchers are going to try and get funding, and now post-COVID, well, we hope post-COVID, it's much more difficult for funders to get funding today. So finding funding agencies is not easy for researchers, or at least not as easy as it sounds. We have to identify a project, and we work with researchers to identify projects and then look at a suitable funder for the organization. So we need to look at, when we're looking at funding projects, and that people with dementia, we try to be involved in here in Ireland, which is a pretty new initiative. When we get involved, we need to look at, is this a piece of funding that maybe we could get funding through academia, we could get funding through our local government services, we could get funding through pharma. So we have to look at who's the best match for us. So if we find the suitable organization or company, or maybe there could be national or local grants that could help. Private funders or foundations provide funding to full of promise. In particular, when it's full of promise, they're more than happy then to give contributions. And research, well, there is money in the markets there for some research projects, not as much as we would like. And professional organisations like the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, they also have some seed funding for specific or other specific funding where they will work with universities and maybe find some way of offering a scholarship or to deliver a particular research project. And one of the things that, Anthea, we found here in Ireland, in our small little island, was that we did not have enough people to participate in research. So we set up something called a Dementia Advisory Board, which I sit on. And we look at these things. We look at what are the projects, how can you look for funding, and that has really helped immensely, because we've been able to bring in a lot of people through a new thing that we set up called Team Up. So we put out a call throughout the country and in the media, and particularly on social media, asking for people if they were interested in participating in research on dementia. Whether it was a person that had a family member, or it was a person that had it, or whether it was, somebody that was interested in participating in research. And that is really a great initiative. We've only had it up for about 2 months. We have 150 people, which is a lot for us, to really get involved. So I think when you do things like that, you're creative and innovative in your ways of dealing with how we're going to reach funders. It's important that we look at the project, we're involved, people with dementia. We're only two, honestly, in most countries, and I work very closely with colleagues in Canada, as you know, and we're only too happy to give our voices, to lend our voices to researchers so that we can get funding, they can get the appropriate funding.
For the projects that you think should be funded.
For the projects that we together, we agree is a good idea.
Can I add that we haven't prepared this question, but when you've sat on some of the actual funding decision-making panels, that make the decision about, so the projects have been written and you're reviewing the different proposals to decide what will be funded. Have you ever had any be funded that you feel didn't really address the needs of people living with dementia, but they were funded anyway?
Oh yes, of course, because many times there's more power than our voices, so it's it could be what you or who you know, not what you know. So yes, it can be disappointing to see some projects. I am not, I know you are, but I am not a lover of dementia friendly communities. I'm a lover of dementia inclusive communities. So when I hear about funding being given to a dementia friendly community, I think, well, friends come and friends go, but we need an inclusive community, because we need everybody in the community. I don't want to be different. I don't want to be different than my friends that have other Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis or whatever other illness, or none. I want to be totally included in the community that I was in. So yes, that's an example of maybe something that I would have much preferred if they used the word inclusive, because of my rights-based approach.
Yeah, and dementia supportive communities are another phrase that are often used, but I agree, inclusive and supportive are better phrases. But I think when the policy directive came out and was using the term friends, it was to try and encourage people to look at things more positively. But I agree, the word inclusive or supportive is preferable. I want to, you've kind of alluded it to a little bit there when you were talking about some of your work in Ireland, but can we think about the policy influencing work that you've done? Because one of the things that wasn't mentioned in your introduction is that you're on the World Health Organization Observatory. So you're on an international scale as well in relation to policy influencing around dementia. You've been involved in European policy influencing work particularly through Alzheimer Europe, and obviously at the Irish level as well. So I just wondered if you could start by talking about Ireland first. How did you get involved with that Irish Dementia Working Group? You mentioned it a little bit before that you looked to Scotland and the Scottish Dementia Working Group, but can you just talk a little bit more about how you got involved in the Irish work in the first instance?
How I got involved is that when I was diagnosed, there were no services for people like me. In fact, I'm afraid to say that it wasn't being spoken about the illness. And as a human rights-based campaigner, I have to say, after a few months of nowhere to go other than go home and stay at home and give up on life, I realized my own rights were being violated while I was busy in the past looking at other people's rights. So I was the first person in Ireland 10 years ago to go public and talk about my diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And how I got involved in this was that I was talking to some friends about not having any services, and somebody heard Professor Ian Robinson, a great Scottish man who works at Trinity College Dublin, was talking about doing some research, and he was looking for people with Alzheimer's like myself to get in touch. And my friend and nurse gave me the information, and I contacted him, and that was my first contact with any kind of anybody else with any form of dementia. And the research that was being done was something called cognitive rehabilitative therapy. And cognitive rehabilitative therapy for somebody that's newly diagnosed is absolutely wonderful, because it gives us and helps us with how to achieve goals every day, how not to give up on life. Simple things like labeling the cupboards, like putting labels on, turn out the lights, turn off the stove, all kinds of simple things. And that is how I got involved in my work. And because that research was being carried out with the Irish Dementia Working Group, who were being supported by the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, and the Irish Dementia Working Group were being newly formed. And so then I got, after my first meeting, I thought, I'm coming across the country. Everything is in Dublin and Ireland. So I live on the complete opposite side of the country. So after my 3.5-hour journey on the train, I thought, well, I won't be doing this now very much as a talking shop, but I will do something. And as a former businesswoman who was very active, I really want to see change. And I think within me was that old bit. My husband used to always say, Sean used to say, if only I could have a bit of the old Helen back. Well, it soon came back. I'm not sure that he was prepared for what was going to happen, the explosion in his life. But, I immediately got to work with colleagues in the Irish Dementia Working Group through with the support of the Alzheimer's Society, with engaging with the health department, or Department of Health first. We first drafted, supported and contributed to the drafting of our National Dementia Strategy. And then shortly thereafter, we got involved in drafting a Charter of Rights. And those things, they are really achievements for us. They've been really achievements in my life. And one of the other greatest achievements in my time has been research work on psychosocial interventions and getting rid of psychotropic medicines. Yeah. And so I think there are things that we have really been able to do, Anthea, which, we have taken small steps to do, but we are now so involved in media campaigns. I constantly, I'm being asked to do things, as you said, through the media. But also one of the things we do is we have a pre-budget submission with our government every year. And the greatest achievement to date, without doubt, is that now we have a committee within our government for dementia. So the Department of Health have a specific area that deals with dementia. So that is, and our message when we go to speak to our politicians is, we want to stay in our own homes. Stop talking and funding other homes like care homes. Our homes are ours. We paid and love to live in our communities and our inclusive communities. And that's where we want to belong for the rest of our days. And that is really, having those things, and you see them and you feel them and you think, I contributed to those. 10 years ago, I thought I was dying. If I looked at Dr. Google when there was nothing else and I was told I'd be gone in 7 years. Well, I'm fighting harder than ever 10 years later for how we can make changes. And we have a campaign here in Ireland called Understand Together, where the Department of Health again have funded this great campaign to break down stigma. I had my name on the back of a bus and my photo on the back of a bus, and you walked into the train station and you were facing yourself up on a big poster where you were breaking down stigma. So look, it was a bit of a laugh. Most times I did this when I was going through the train station in case anybody recognized me and said, is that you up there? So, but you know, we did things, and you do things because you want to see change. And you probably all hear in my voice that I'm really passionate about these things, but I am, because I think the more we can give our voices, the more we can influence policy. And that's influencing policy. That was influencing policy at national level. And also our contribution other countries can see what we do. And like we saw what Scotland did, and they can take this and they can learn from it.
Yeah. And Ireland did achieve a lot in a very short period of time, actually, in terms of the policy developments, and the voices of people with dementia were core to that, and obviously helped move the policy directives along, I think. You just mentioned there about Europe and learning from other countries. And I know when you were chair of the European Dementia Working Group, I remember you talking about some of the challenges of involving people from other European countries to try and influence policy across Europe. I remember you talking about, for example, people from Hungary and certain countries that they just wouldn't talk about dementia. So I wonder if you could talk about some of the challenges that you found at the European level of involving people with dementia and those kind of policy influencing roles that the European Dementia Working Group did with Alzheimer Europe.
One of the biggest challenges we have is the English language, and getting people with dementia to be able to participate in the European Working Group of people with dementia, because even if English is not their first language, and they have known English for many, many years because of their memory issues, that the language they have lost it. So it is the biggest challenge that we have. Every country is very different in terms of their policies, and in terms of their the amount of funding, in particular, given to the illness, and that is that's a huge issue. And we try to support countries by me traveling to Hungary and talking about it, or to Bulgaria, or to the Czech Republic, those countries where now maybe funding is a little healthier. But also I talked earlier about the language. So take, for example, Finland. Finland do not recognize the word dementia.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about having a group of people sitting around the table, and maybe many of them don't recognize the word dementia. So they're called memory problems, or they have other names with the word memory as opposed to dementia. And so then, you have those challenges that Alzheimer's Europe and the World Health are all talking about dementia, but in those countries, those words are not used. And also, and needless to say, there still is a huge element of stigma around it because of sad to say the I suppose the mental health element of it, and I have in my work I've addressed the mental health, the EU Mental Health Commission, and spoke about this about where we belong, and we have a brain disease, we have a memory issue, we're not mentally ill, and is this where we belong? So in some countries they have changed it, in other countries they haven't. So it's a challenge, and it's a challenge here in Ireland because it's still under mental health. So we have to look at those challenges and see how we can support each other. But by discussing them and talking about them, which is the role of the European Working Group of People with Dementia, that we are we're involved in many activities in research, and some of this research is also around policy. So we can influence and we can change, and we talk at least once a year, if not twice a year, to the European Parliament, and we address in many ways our concerns with our European MPs. And so we are trying to overcome those challenges, but and we continue to work on them. And I have no doubt that with all of us trying to work together, and I've seen the changes. you know, I think were we in Bulgaria together. When I see the changes in some of these countries now as to when I started with Alzheimer's Europe 8 years ago, it's just wonderful to see, because things are moving, but they're moving at a slower pace probably than Scotland or maybe Ireland, but they are moving, and they're moving in the right direction. And that's because of good collaboration, and that's because we're all working together to change perception, influence policy and practice in order to improve the lives of people with dementia throughout Europe.
Yeah. Can we talk about the World Health Organization work that you've been doing? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, can I just say about Alzheimer's, about our European Working Group as well? Sure. You know, I just want to mention, because I think it's really important that everybody on the call understands that, you know, we participate in a lot of research in Alzheimer's Europe, and we have something called InterDem, which is early detection and timely interventions, where we explore psychosocial interventions, which is something that I'm very interested in. And then we have something called Radar-AD, which is innovative medicines again, which is experimenting with different devices and software. And did we ever find a better time to do this research than with the lockdown? Because we all needed to use new devices. So we look at devices that can track our functionality and our cognitive decline. And that's been really interesting. And of course, again, this roadmap, real world outcomes for the quality of care that we have and the priorities that we can set. And these are all taken into consideration with researchers. And I think that kind of work we do, certainly that can monitor our progress and our trajectory, besides just talking about our medical model, is really great. So I just wanted to add that there, that our work is really very much research driven. Well, the World Health Global Dementia Observatory, Anthea, Knowledge Exchange, I'm delighted to be part of that with 2 Canadian colleagues. And this tool contains resources to support the Global Action Plan on Public Health Action on Dementia. And what we do is we look at resources that are in countries all around the world. And we look at those every couple of weeks. Stakeholders can submit a resource such as a policy or guidelines or case studies or examples of good practice. And that's what we look at. And all of those, when we decide, well, this is a really good policy, or this is a really good guideline, then the World Health can put that up on their Knowledge Exchange platform, and people all around the world can see it. And so what's so rewarding about it is that there's no need anymore to reinvent the wheel. You can go onto the World Health Organization Knowledge Exchange, and you can see policies, and you can see examples of good policy and of guidelines that are something that's really useful to people with dementia, that to give them joy and happiness in their lives, that are up on the website. So it's really a rewarding. Honestly, I have to say it's so rewarding, and I thoroughly enjoy it, because I know that the world can look at these things, and countries no longer, where we talk about research and about funding, Anthea, yes, you don't need to be paying for these things anymore, because a lot of them are on the website. And so we must continue to encourage as many countries as we can, no matter where we are, to try and submit the resources they have, because they may not think that they may be useful, but they are useful. And we want to look at them. We want to come back and tell them, maybe this is how you can change something, and that they can be used in another country.
Yeah, remember we tried to do that maybe about 10 years ago in terms of rural examples, and there was a group of us from Australia, Scandinavia, Canada, and Scotland, and we tried to get examples of resources to help other rural areas, and we really struggled to source those and find those, but they're so helpful to people when they've got limited resources and they're maybe at a different stage of their development. So I think this initiative that you're talking about is really, really valuable. So I just wanted to kind of bring attention to that. I spoke to Jim Mann about it last week, and he was saying it's probably one of the most pleasurable things that he's been involved in too, in terms of rewarding and seeing this whole raft of initiatives and resources now becoming available for people to tap into. So it's an excellent resource. I'm aware of time now, Helen, so I've got one last question, which is if you've got any other practical tips that you would want to share, either for researchers or funders or policymakers, about how they can really involve people living with dementia in more meaningful ways. If you just have any final tips that you wanted to share for us to end our conversation.
Yeah, I think researchers have to reach out to us. And they're probably going to ask which was asked recently at a meeting, was that, well, where do we find you? You know, will you find us through your local Alzheimer's or dementia group in your country? But we are there, and it's important that people are encouraged to participate and not to be afraid to participate in research. And it's about researchers. I've seen so many researchers, and particularly young researchers over the years, they think we cannot speak, you know, they think we can't engage, they think we can't laugh, you know, they think, you know, oh my God, these people are so, and then all of a sudden, you know, they're sitting around the table and we're all laughing and having fun and turning this research into a magical project. And that's what we want to say, is that we're, you know, we just have a memory impairment. You know, we enjoy life. You know, for the most part, we enjoy it. With our limitations, but we can really contribute. And, you know, our voices matter, because as you do your research, there's only one voice, and it's the voice of the person. So how are we going to change if that voice is not included? It's like some of the researchers participated in, you know, RADAR or whatever, that, you know, if you're only looking at the medical model and you're not really listening to the person, you're not going to change that medical model. So it's important that researchers, in particular today, there's a lot of work, Anthea, going on in technology. And we have so much we can contribute to that, because we have all now living on Alexa and Otter and teleprompter and everything else. So, you know, we need researchers to understand that we can participate, and we will participate. And I rarely ever heard somebody involved with any of the groups that have been involved, you know, all over Europe and beyond, that they do not want to give their voice. And it's about giving our voice and listening to the voice and ensuring that that is part of the research project that you're going to do.
Okay, that's great. That leaves us a few minutes there for any questions that I'm sure people might have questions for you, Helen, because you've touched on so many interesting areas of things that you've got involved in. So will we open it up to questions now, Rebecca? Is that okay?
For sure, absolutely. So first, before I open it up to questions, I just want to say thank you both for that brilliant talk. I know some of the people that are on the line here, we have Mary Burnett, who's from the Alzheimer's Society of Brant, Haldeman, Norfolk, Hamilton, and Halton, so our local area. So it's probably music to Mary's ears. And I know other people who are involved in the Hamilton Council on Aging and thinking about dementia for inclusive, I shouldn't say friendly, dementia inclusive approaches locally. So I am just going to, we don't have any chats yet, just or any questions in the chat, just an acknowledgement of your excellent presentation. So I'll just open it up to the group. Maybe if we stop spotlighting and we can just go to gallery view and we can see. I will say I could also see throughout your presentation what you were saying really resonated with people. I could see people nodding and acknowledging. So I'm going to turn it over to the audience and see if anyone has any questions or comments or reactions.